It's easy to admire the Roman Empire for its roads, aqueducts, and stunning marble statues. But what if we told you that some of Rome's most impressive creations weren't just about civilization, but domination? Hidden beneath the triumphal arches and carefully carved inscriptions was a world of brutal efficiency. An empire that didn't just conquer with armies, but with machines designed to break walls, rip through armor, and silence resistance fast. In today's episode, we uncover Rome's deadliest inventions and war tech that was centuries ahead of its time. What made their army nearly unstoppable? What kind of tools turned battlefields into laboratories of destruction? Stick around, because once you see how advanced and terrifying these war machines really were, you'll never look at the ancient world the same way again. Let's start with a machine built to tear through bone, stone, and steel. The Roman ballista was a weapon of force and precision, engineered to destroy at a distance. It worked on a system of tightly wound torsion springs, bundles of twisted sinew or rope that stored enormous energy. At its heart were two arms, pulled back using winches and a mechanical claw. When released, they would hurl a bolt or stone fast enough to punch through armor, crack open wooden gates, or collapse stone defenses. This wasn't guesswork. Roman engineers carefully tuned each ballista using pins and notched bronze caps to adjust tension. They balanced power with accuracy, adapting for wind, weight, and humidity. The weapon didn't just fire, it launched calibrated death. Unlike the curved bow of a crossbow, the ballista's arms worked like levers, transferring power from the twisted springs directly into the shot. Bolts flew flat and fast, making it easy to target a specific shield, wall joint, or man. Roman soldiers could hit enemies from hundreds of meters away. On the battlefield, reports tell of commanders using ballistae to pick off individuals with terrifying precision. Smaller versions like the Scorpio and Caro ballista were light enough to mount on wagons. These were pulled into combat by armored horses, placed on towers, and turned into mobile artillery. They weren't built just for sieges. Ballistae were used during naval assaults, field battles, and even ambushes. Ballistae were crafted with interchangeable parts and strong wooden frames, reinforced by iron plates. Some were entirely metal. Designs continued to evolve, reaching distances of up to 1,200 yards. Roman engineers kept careful notes, and archaeological reconstructions today confirm just how effective they were. By the time of the Empire, no Roman fortress was built without accounting for them. Towers across London once held ballistae aimed outward. Caesar used them during the invasion of Britain, forcing defenders to retreat just from the sight and sound of the strange machines. At Alesia and Masada, they helped crush walls and willpower. Procopius described a bolt driving through a Gothic warrior's chest, through his armor and halfway into a tree behind him. It held his corpse upright, pinned to the wood like a warning. The ballista was the ancient world's sniper rifle. It didn't need numbers, it only needed a target. However, if you thought the ballista was ahead of its time, wait to hear about the Roman Onager, an engine so violent it couldn't even be placed on stone walls without breaking them. The Onager was a single-armed torsion catapult built for raw force. It earned its name from the wild ass, onagrum in Latin, because of the way it kicked upwards during firing. It used a large frame with a vertical throwing arm twisted tightly into a bundle of sinew or rope. The tension came from winding this rope coil to an extreme pressure. When the arm was pulled down and released, it snapped upward with such explosive energy that it launched stones weighing up to 100 pounds across hundreds of meters. The key to the Onager's terrifying power was its torsion bundle. Twisting it stored potential energy. The wooden arm, tipped with a cup or later a sling, released that energy all at once, sending the projectile high into the air or straight into a wall. Over time, engineers replaced the bucket with a sling, which lengthened the arm without adding weight. This boosted speed, distance, and impact force, making the weapon faster without making it heavier. Roman soldiers used windlasses to crank the arm down into the firing position. It took up to 8 men to do this. When it fired, the arm slammed into a padded beam with enough recoil to shake the ground. Ancient writers warned that placing an onager on a fortress wall could break the stones beneath it. Even scaled-down reconstructions in modern times have torn themselves apart from the shock. The onager's reach and force changed the rules of siege warfare. It could destroy enemy walls, collapse towers, and send fear rippling through enemy lines. Ammianus Marcellinus recorded just how one stone from an onager scattered Gothic troops, not from casualties, but from the thunderous impact and chaos it caused. During the siege of Alesia and the battles at Adrianople, the engine's stones were launched to create maximum destruction whether or not they hit a target. The fear it inspired did the rest. Engineers designed the onager to be built large and simple. Unlike the ballista, it needed fewer precise parts and could be assembled in the field. Each Roman legion was supposed to carry at least 10 of them, mounted on ox-drawn carts. This made the weapon mobile and ready to fire during sudden attacks or defences. As Roman warfare evolved, the onager became a mainstay for breaching fortifications and breaking morale. Later improvements made it even more efficient. The sling gave it longer range without needing more power. With a lighter arm and more speed, it became deadlier, even from behind Roman walls. Imagine now a towering machine of wood and iron rolling across the battlefield, rising level with the city walls, packed with armed men, weapons, and flame-proof hides stretched across its flanks. That machine was the Roman siege tower, a moving fortress designed to carry destruction straight to the enemy's gates. Siege towers were tall, rectangular structures built with one purpose: overwhelm a city's defences from above. Their size depended on the height of the enemy's walls. If the target rose 30 feet, the tower rose 35. If it stood in a hill, ramps or siege mounds would be raised beneath it, sometimes hundreds of feet wide, to bring the tower into position. The structure itself was reinforced with iron plating or wrapped in soaked animal hides to resist fire, the most common counterattack by defenders. Each tower was a mobile platform. Inside, soldiers climbed narrow stairways to reach the upper levels. At the top, archers and slingers fired down at defenders with protected cover. In the centre, spearmen waited to charge. On the bottom floor, battering rams were mounted to slam the base of the walls while the tower edged forward. These weren't improvised machines. Roman towers were planned, engineered, and sometimes pre-assembled before being brought into the battlefield in parts. When ready, the front panel dropped like a gangplank. Soldiers stormed out onto the enemy walls, often while enemy fire rained down from above. But from inside the tower, retaliating volleys continued non-stop. Troops hidden behind wooden shields poured arrows into any opening, clearing the path ahead. The Romans didn't invent the siege tower, but they mastered it. They understood how to adapt the design for land, sea, and even elevation. Historical records describe siege towers mounted on ships, their bases flattened to keep balance as they approached coastal cities. On land, the wheels were fixed on solid axles, sometimes as wide as 20 feet. Towers rolled forward on level ground and were pushed up siege ramps, massive slopes built from dirt, timber, and stone. One of the most famous Roman siege ramps still stands today at Masada in modern-day Israel. Built during the siege of 72-73 AD, the ramp supported heavy towers and battering rams, and eventually broke the defences of one of history's most determined holdouts. Siege towers were slow to build and difficult to transport, but when they reached their target, they changed the battle instantly. No wall was too high. At first glance, battering rams were just a piece of wood, but in Roman hands it became a methodical, unstoppable force that could bring down gates, walls, and the will of anyone behind them. A Roman battering ram was far more than a log. The beam, sometimes as long as 30 feet, was capped with iron, often forged into the shape of a ram's head. This metal point focused the impact into a smaller area, multiplying the force and cracking even the strongest stone. The beam itself was hung from thick ropes or chains inside a wheeled shelter. This gave it swing, weight, and rhythm, qualities that when combined could tear down entire sections of fortification. The structure surrounding the ram was just as important. It was called a testudo, or tortoise. Roofed, reinforced, and draped in soaked animal hides, it protected the operators from fire and arrows. Dozens of soldiers could fit inside, heaving the ram forward in unison, driving the metal tip again and again into stone or wood. Each strike sent a thunderous echo through the ground. Sometimes one hit was enough to open a breach. These shelters moved slowly but deliberately. They rolled on wide wheels and were often built on site from local materials. The Romans could adjust the weight and balance of the ram depending on the size of the wall or gate. If defenders managed to set traps or fire, the soaked hides absorbed flames and protected the ram until the attack could continue. Some versions added a chain hook at the end of the ram. Once embedded in the wall, it was pulled back, tearing out stones that had already been loosened by the impact. Others were built with slanted roofs to deflect projectiles and curved slides to allow movement under enemy towers. Roman engineers refined every detail. They observed how walls fractured under repeated blows and changed the shape of the ram's head to suit different types of stone. They tracked the momentum needed for each swing. Some rams were mounted on rollers rather than hung, giving more speed with every strike. Others were so light they could be carried on the shoulders of troops who brought them straight to the weakest section of a wall and began pounding. Once a ram was in place and the first strike landed, the siege had officially begun. Roman law treated that moment as a turning point. Once the wall was struck, defenders had lost their right to mercy. The battering ram marked the shift from blockade to destruction. At Jotapata in 67 AD, the historian Josephus watched as a Roman ram shattered the wall with a single blow. The next deadliest invention by the Roman army was the Gladius Hispaniensis, a short sword that cut down enemies in close combat with brutal efficiency. The weapon was not Roman in origin. It came from the Iberian Peninsula, where tribal warriors had developed it through generations of warfare. Roman soldiers first encountered the blade during the Punic Wars, when it was wielded by Iberian mercenaries fighting alongside the Carthaginians. Its design was so effective that Rome quickly adopted it and spread it across the empire. From Gaul to Judea, the gladius became the signature weapon of the Roman legionary. The blade was straight, double-edged, and came to a deadly point. It measured between 60 and 68 centimeters in length, with a full sword length of up to 85 centimeters. Though short, it was built for precision. In the crush of battle, soldiers fought at arm's length or closer. Shield pressed forward, gladius held low. At that point, the mucro was shaped to pierce directly through armor, ribs, or the soft gap between the neck and shoulder. The Romans trained to stab, not slash. A stab wound is harder to block, harder to survive, and easier to repeat in quick succession. Legionaries advanced in tight formation, shield to shield, using the gladius to strike beneath or around their defences. The sword's weight, around 1 kilogram, was balanced perfectly with a wooden hilt and a pommel that acted as a counterweight. This let soldiers pivot, turn, and strike again with control. Archaeological finds show that the gladius was often crafted from iron or steel, depending on the region and available resources. In some advanced examples, smiths used pattern welding, layering different strips of metal to produce a stronger, more flexible blade. The edge held longer, and the sword could withstand more impacts before breaking. Some even show evidence of early carburization, adding carbon to iron to harden the blade further. The handle, though short, was carefully shaped. Some had finger grooves carved into the wood for better grip. Others were reinforced with bronze, or even plated with silver for officers. The design changed slightly over time. Early versions like the original Hispaniensis had a leaf-shaped curve near the middle of the blade. The gladius worked because of its simplicity. It could be mass-produced, easily sharpened, and used effectively by anyone who had completed the intense training of a Roman soldier. In the chaos of ancient warfare, it was the weapon that required the least movement to kill. A single thrust to the gut or throat was often enough. Not only were the Romans good at designing land war machinery, they were also real geniuses when it came to land warfare, especially when they brought it onto the sea. One of their most brutal naval inventions was the Corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into face-to-face bloodshed. The Corvus was a long wooden plank, about 11 meters in length and 1.2 meters wide, mounted at the front of Roman warships. Its name, Latin for crow, came from the heavy iron spike that hung from its underside like a hooked beak. When the device dropped, that spike would slam into the deck of an enemy ship, lock the vessels together, and open the way for Roman soldiers to charge across. The ship became a battlefield, and that's exactly what the Romans wanted. This invention came during the First Punic War, a time when Rome had no tradition of naval strength. Carthage dominated the seas with fast, maneuverable ships and experienced crews, but Rome had its infantry, the most disciplined, aggressive fighters in the world. To level the playing field, Roman engineers created the Corvus so that legionaries could fight the way they were trained, on their feet, in tight ranks, killing with swords rather than oars. The Corvus was fixed to a tall pole on the ship's prow. A system of pulleys and ropes let sailors raise and lower it as needed. When a Carthaginian ship came close, the crew released the mechanism. The iron spike pierced into the deck and the bridge dropped hard and fast. Roman mariners and naval soldiers rushed across, shields up, swords drawn. The enemy ship was no longer free to maneuver, it became a wooden trap, filled with close combat and panic. This device helped win Rome's first major sea battle at Mylae in 260 BC. Roman consul Gaius Julius used the Corvus to capture 30 Carthaginian ships in a single day, including the enemy flagship. At Ecnomus in 256 BC, the Corvus was used again, this time to support a massive operation to invade North Africa. The boarding bridge let Roman ships link up and turn each fight into a coordinated attack. Carthaginian soldiers tried to avoid close contact, but the reach and speed of the Corvus made that nearly impossible. The strength of this invention was not just the weapon itself, but the way it matched Roman thinking. Rome always relied on discipline, formation, and overwhelming force. By turning sea battles into infantry battles, they erased Carthage's natural advantage and forced the enemy to fight on Roman terms. Based on all this, you understand how advanced the Romans were, so it will not surprise you to learn that even their temporary military camps were tactical and perfectly organized. The Romans designed this specifically for them to build, sleep, and survive in the middle of hostile territory. These camps were called castra, and they followed a modular layout used by Roman legions wherever they went. A marching army could construct a fortified base every night. Whether deep in enemy lands or camped at the edge of a river, the shape stayed the same. The structure stayed the same. The system never changed. Each castrum began with geometry. The layout followed a strict grid, a perfect square, divided into streets, sections, and gates. Engineers called grommatici marked the center point using a tool known as the groma, while soldiers with measuring rods laid out the boundaries with military precision. From this central point, the streets radiated outward in straight lines. The Via Praetoria led from the main gate to the heart of the camp. The Principia, or command center, always stood in the middle. Around the outer edges, Roman soldiers dug a defensive trench called the fossa, throwing the earth inward to create a raised rampart called the agger. On top of this, they built a palisade made from sharpened stakes carried by the troops. Within hours, the army had built a fortress from scratch, complete with ditches, walls, guard towers, and entry gates. Each camp housed a full legion and was divided into standard sections. Every soldier knew exactly where to go. 8 men shared a tent. They cooked their food, stored their weapons, and slept side by side. Cohorts were grouped together, forming neat rows of temporary homes. This structure kept the army organized, even during long campaigns and unpredictable weather. The discipline it took to raise such camps every night was staggering. After hours of marching, the Roman soldiers didn't rest. They built, they dug, they measured, and fortified. Hadrian's Wall in Britain shows how this system extended into permanent structures. Along the wall, Roman engineers built outposts and watchtowers in the same modular fashion. Each fort mirrored the marching camps, the same roads, the same defences, the same logic. Even their border became a battlefield, carefully designed in advance. If you thought that Roman inventions were without traps, you are mistaken. Some of the most brutal weapons they used left no scars on the body, but brought down entire cavalry charges before a sword was drawn. These defensive field traps built not to be seen, but to maim, break momentum, and turn advancing armies into confused, limping targets. The most famous of these traps was the Caltrop, a simple but horrifying device. Shaped like a 4-pointed spike, it always landed with one sharp point facing upward. Romans scattered caltrops in fields where enemy cavalry was expected to charge. Horses, camels, even war elephants couldn't avoid them. As hooves or feet came down on them, the spikes punctured deep, crippling the animal instantly. Movement stopped, chaos began. Caltrops were known in Rome as tribuli and were small enough to be hidden in tall grass, narrow roads, or shallow earth. Roman engineers made them from bronze or iron, strong enough to penetrate thick hooves or wound a soldier's foot through a sandal. Against fast-moving chariots, these traps acted like instant brakes. The wheels might survive, but once one horse collapsed, the chariot flipped or jammed the path behind it. Roman infantry could then strike while their enemies lay scattered or struggling to stand. But the caltrop was only the beginning. Romans also dug pits with sharpened stakes, hidden beneath branches, earth, or even animal skins. These pits were carefully placed near walls, gates, or known paths of attack. Soldiers and horses would charge forward, fall in and be impaled on the spikes inside. Some were designed with barbed metal points, curved back to prevent escape or removal without severe injury. Once a line of soldiers fell into one, the momentum of those behind often led to a chain of collapse, an entire unit undone in seconds. To protect their camps or fortresses, Roman troops also used fortified ditches. Dug deep and wide, they acted as barriers that slowed movement and funneled attackers into narrow kill zones. Sometimes the ditches were dry, filled with debris and broken stakes. Other times they were lined with sharpened wood or iron spikes to create a deadly obstacle. Behind the ditch came the palisade or wall where Roman soldiers waited in formation, ready to strike. Roman engineers planned them as part of the battlefield or camp design. Even the equipment the Roman soldiers wore was a form of discipline. It was technology designed for war, copied and repeated until every legionnaire looked like a walking weapon. Standardization of weapons and armor gave the Roman army one of its most powerful advantages: predictability and chaos. Every Roman soldier carried nearly identical gear. This wasn't for appearance, it was for speed, logistics, and survival. Training was simpler, repairs were faster, replacements could be issued without delay. In battle, every movement lined up, shield to shield, sword to sword. The most iconic piece of Roman defense was the scrutum. It was a large, curved, rectangular shield made of wood, covered in leather and edged with metal. Its shape was no accident. It wrapped slightly around the body, protecting a soldier from shoulder to knee, and could interlock with neighbouring shields to form the testudo, the tortoise formation that turned men into a living wall. Arrows bounced off. Javelins struck but didn't pierce. In sieges, it let entire units move forward under a roof of protection. Behind the shield came armour. The laurica segmentata, developed during the height of the Empire, was made of metal strips riveted to leather. It offered strong protection while allowing soldiers to move freely. Earlier versions, like the laurica hamata, made of chainmail, or the laurica squamata, covered in scale-shaped metal, were still used by auxiliaries and officers. For the legs, soldiers strapped on greaves, bronze or leather guards that protected the shins during brutal close combat. The cassus, or helmet, sat low on the head with cheek guards, a brow ridge and a neck protector. Some had crests to identify ranks. Underneath, soldiers wore a focale, a wooden scarf to prevent the helmet from cutting into the neck during long marches. Each soldier also carried a pilum, a heavy javelin about 2 meters long. The metal shaft was designed to bend on impact so enemies couldn't throw it back. Before the clash of swords, these were launched in volleys. They tore through shields and disrupted formations. The next moment, the Roman line was already charging. At this side hung the Gladius, the short-stabbing sword that turned the tide in countless battles. Held in place by the ballistae, a sword belt slung across the waist. The Gladius was light, deadly, and designed for the tight spaces of hand-to-hand combat. On the move, every Roman soldier carried a sarcina, a military pack that held food, tools, and spare equipment. The same gear, repeated across the legions, meant that every Roman army carried its system on its back, ready to fight, build, or survive in any landscape. So next time you hear about ancient history, try to picture an army that carried its own city on its back, built fortresses overnight, and turned every battle into a calculated system. The Romans didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with design, discipline, and a mindset centuries ahead of their time. And it makes you wonder, in a world full of modern tools and technology, are we still as efficient as they were with only muscle, iron, and will?